Hi students, in this video I'd like to give you a quick introduction to WordPress. In this lesson I'm going to give you a very brief history of web design, sort of how it used to be thought about versus how it is now. That will take us into a discussion of Web 2.0 and content management systems. Then I want to talk a little bit about why specifically I'm asking you to use WordPress in this class. It's not the only content management system, so why are we using this one? And I want to discuss the parts of WordPress and other key terms that you need to know before you begin your tutorial in order to be successful at using WordPress. So let's start by sort of revisiting a concept we've looked at before, the idea of sort of the old web versus Web 2.0 or the new web. So decades ago, when the web was newer, when people who were not government agencies or academic groups were starting to explore the internet and look at its possibilities for publishing content and connecting with people, in order to make a website, you had to basically know how to write code that made a website exist. So content creators had to either write the code themselves or give the content to someone who could write the code to implement their content on the web. The result was that not that many people had websites. It was kind of difficult to get your content on the web. Today, you can just go to a number of websites, create a username and password, and they'll give you the tools you need to put stuff online without knowing code. But back before that was possible, in what I've termed the olden days, you had to know code. You had to be a programmer. And I want to be really clear about what I'm saying when I talk about coding or programming. Someone who codes or programs, what they're doing is they're communicating with the computer in a language the computer understands. It's very similar to taking a class in Spanish and then communicating with Spanish speakers. People who write code, who consider themselves programmers, they study and learn the languages that computers understand, and then they write it so that they can communicate with computers and tell computers what to do. So languages, programming languages, and there are many, are just different languages like Spanish, French, Italian, that have their own set of words and their own rules for structure. Just like in a foreign language that you study, you have to learn the dictionary, so you need to memorize definitions, and then you have to learn the structure, you know, whether the subject goes before the verb. Programming is the same thing, except the language that you're using is a computer language instead of a human language. And once a programmer writes out the terms they want the computer to get in the structure they want it to be in, the computer interprets it and then does what those commands tell it to do. So programming, coding, it's really the same as what you do in your foreign language class, except you're using computer definitions, you're using the language of computers, and when you speak to the computer, it does what you say. Now there's two key terms that I want to talk about that have pretty much existed since even the olden days that you have to know about now. Those are domain and hosting. You will be buying a domain and hosting for this week's WordPress tutorial, so I want to be very clear about what it is you're buying and why you're buying it. How is a website made? Well, a website is a string of words that a computer understands, and a language it understands in a certain order that tell the computer what to do. So a website is just a bunch of words in a certain structure that explain to the computer what should be shown to the user when someone goes to a website. So you have a bunch of code that makes up your website. You might also have content like pictures and sentences and videos that make up your website. All of that has to live somewhere. It has to go somewhere. That's stuff. Just like when you save a Word document on your computer and it takes up space on your computer, these items that you're putting on a website take up space and they have to live somewhere. They have to take up space on a computer somewhere. And when you buy hosting, you are buying that space. So hosting is really just renting space to put your files on, to put your code, your videos, your pictures. If you have Dropbox, a service where you can upload files to the web and they're saved there and you can access them from any computer, that's exactly the same concept as hosting. Dropbox takes your files and puts them on a computer somewhere so you don't have to worry about them and you can access them from anywhere. That's exactly what hosting does. With hosting, you're renting space on a computer somewhere. So these companies that sell hosting, they literally have warehouses of computers that are connected to the internet. And when you pay them money for hosting, they just let you use some of that computing power to hold your files. Now, that is great because you have a place for your website to live, but how do people get to your website? You have to purchase a domain, and the domain is just the name of the site. So for Ball State, it's bsu.edu. I would suggest for this class, since you are creating a portfolio, that you try to buy a domain that is yourname.com. So I own meganmcnames.com. If you have a more common name like Kelly Jones or something like that, maybe try putting your middle initial or your full middle name, but I would highly suggest trying to get your name. I would not suggest buying your client's name because your client may already own the domain, and the client site, at the end of 16 weeks, you might sort of be done with it. You might not necessarily need it to be around for a long time, but you probably want your portfolio to last. So when you buy a domain, you're buying the name of the site. And what's interesting about the domain is you're paying actually to register it. It's very similar to what the FCC does with radio frequencies. There are a finite number of frequencies available for radio stations to broadcast on. WCRD, for example, uses 91.3. In order to ensure that another radio station doesn't move into the area and try to compete and try to broadcast their own station on 91.3, the FCC registers radio stations to keep track of who is allowed to broadcast on what frequency. With domain names, you're doing the same thing. You register for a year, and for that year, you are considered the person who has the right to publish on that domain name. So in this class, you'll pay, I think, $13 to get your domain name, and you'll have it for a year. And next year, if you want your portfolio to still exist, you'll pay another $13, and you'll get to be the owner of that domain for another year. So when you buy the domain, you also tell the organization you're buying it from where you want it to go. So I bought meganmcnames.com, and I say, this is my hosting over here. I want this name to be associated with the files on this hosting. I would suggest just using the same company to buy both the domain and hosting because they'll set all that up for you. So if you use Lithium Hosting, for example, which I highly suggest, they have great customer service and a really cheap price. If you go through their process, you buy the domain, you buy the hosting, they automatically connect the two and you don't have to worry about it. So let's talk a little bit about domain and hosting, how this is all working. I've put together a little visual that explains how it works. So we're going to start here at number 1. If a person trying to find your website is on a computer, they'll open your browser, and the browser will give them access to the internet. And they'll type in your domain name in the address bar. What this will do is it will have your browser send a request to figure out, okay, we're going to meganmcnames.com. Where am I supposed to go? Well, I've told my hosting company and my domain company that I want anyone who types in meganmcnames.com to go to my hosting that I pay for. So the browser will send the user on the computer to the hosting. So the request will go to one of the servers that you're renting. So over here on the right, you see an actual picture of a server farm. And you can see it's literally computers stacked up in these big, tall shelves. And people rent space on these. So the browser will take the domain, it'll sort of figure out where that's supposed to go, it'll find the server farm where your information lives, it'll pull up the code, which we see over here on the bottom right, and it'll read through this code and it will do what's called executing the code. So the browser looks at all the code and it says, okay, these are commands, I'm supposed to do what this says, and it converts the commands in the code into the actual site. So this is the code from the front page of bsu.edu. Your browser turns it into what we call the front end, what the user sees, and then that shows up on the computer. So just to sort of iterate that point, the user types in the domain into their browser, it connects to the server where you have hosting, where your files live, pulls up the files, converts them from code commands to an actual site, and then shows it to the user. So you have to buy the domain and the hosting, the browser will do the rest. Let's talk a little bit about some of the basic building blocks of the web. HTML, Hypertext Markup Language, is the basic coding language for most of the web. And hypertext just refers to text that's clickable. So links, the most obvious example of hypertext, text that is clickable and it takes you somewhere else. Markup language just means you're using language to mark up content and tell it what to do. So hypertext markup language basically just means you have some content, you can make it clickable, and you can use little markup codes to tell it what to do. Let's look at a few examples. You will not be writing HTML in this class, but I just want to go over it because I think it's interesting and I think it helps to understand the web and how it works if you understand the basic building blocks. So HTML is used to tell content where it goes and some basic design, like if it's bold. It does a lot more than that, but for the basics, this is about all we need to know. So the main element of HTML is the div, and this is a div tag. See, it's between these little carets. That makes it a tag, so it's a little markup piece that we can put around our content. And the div is just a box where you can put content to separate it from other kinds of content. Div stands for division, or I often think about it as divider because it's easier to think about div as dividing things, but it does stand for division. If we look at the BSU site, you'll see that there's some different divisions separating different areas of content. So across the top we have a navigation bar, it's its own division. Then we have a logo, that's its own division. Then we have the navigation, that's its own division. So you can see that HTML, what it's doing is it's breaking up different parts of the web. And this is why websites are typically boxy in nature and typically designed with lots of rectangular spaces, because divs allow us to break our site up into different sections. Let's take a look at HTML. You may actually recognize some of these HTML tags from MySpace back in the day, if you had it. And you'll see that in the code section, if we put B in a little tag before and after this sentence, then the sentence comes out bold. So when the computer goes to the server and it gets this line, B, this sentence is about cats, end B, this little slash means end, it takes it to the browser, and the browser turns it into the sentence being bold. So B is bold. B in brackets is part of the HTML language. It means bold. Same for I is italic. This is another simple example. You can put I around this sentence is about cats, and it will make this sentence about cats italicized. Now it gets a lot more complicated. This is not much more complicated, but it gets even more complicated than this. So here you'll see we have A. In the HTML language, A means link. Href is for HTML reference, meaning where the link goes, and then we say where we want that link to go, and then this sentence is about, and then end A, so we end the link, and then cats. So you'll see the output, because this sentence is about cats, is between the A's, it becomes a link. Cats is by itself, it doesn't have anything around it, so it's just normal. Let's talk a little bit about CSS, cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets are a way of telling content what to look like. CSS basically determines the attributes of what's on the page. HTML helps us put it on the page and put it in boxes. CSS helps us determine the color, the border, the spacing, the underlining, the shadow, and so on. CSS is actually getting very advanced. But these are some of the basic things you can do with it. So in this example, and again, you won't be writing any CSS, but I want to sort of show you how it works. We've mixed CSS in with the HTML, and the output is that we have the same sentence about cats, but now it is red and it's at 10 pixel font, so it's smaller. So CSS lets us change the attributes of what's on the page. HTML lets us change where it is and what division it's in. CSS helps us change what it looks like, the attributes. So let's take a look at an entire site made with HTML and CSS with a couple other languages mixed in. This is the Cardinal.com website, and you can see each of these right here that has a little icon with blue and green over here is a different file. And they all live together on a server that Ball State is renting. So let me open this file. There it is. So you see the code, and this is all HTML in here. And that's actually the front page. This is the contact page, so I can open the contact page. There it is. So now I'm looking at the contact page. So this site is made of 8 pages that were handwritten with CSS, HTML, and another language called PHP. So as you can see, that could get kind of annoying if you have to make a website by going in and making all these different files for every page, especially if you have a blog. If you're putting a blog together, do you want to make a page for every time you put something on the blog? You do not. Who wants to sit and write this out all day? Well, I kind of like it. There may be some of you who think it's interesting, but for the most part, you probably just want to focus on your content and not worry too much about writing all this HTML. So the difficulty with making everything on your site its own page is that if you want to change something on one page, but it's on all the other pages, you have to go in and change all of them. So the example would be a logo. If you make all the pages from scratch and you put the logo at the top of each one, if you decide you want to change the logo, you have to go into every single one of those pages and take the old logo out and put the new one in. This is called static web construction, when everything is just written out per page. So every page, you have to write the code for exactly what you want on that page. Static web construction. This is not great because you are working with content, right? You're creating lots of content for your audience. You want it to be new all the time. You don't want to have to create a new file every time a new file of code every time you want to publish a story. It just doesn't make sense. You want to focus on the content and not on writing code. So Web 2.0 solves this problem, and we've talked a little bit about Web 2.0. Web 2.0 refers to the new web as it is now. Instead of programming every site like we used to have to do, a lot of programmers have focused on making tools that allow everyone to use the web so they don't have to write code. Pinterest is a good example. With Pinterest, you just click a pin it button and things happen. You can publish something to your board. You didn't have to write any code. You just pressed a button. A programmer came up with that whole system so that you don't have to write code. And so Web 2.0 allows more people to use the web without writing code. So now you can make a site, you can publish an update, you can upload photos without having to know any code. That's the beauty of Web 2.0. With Web 2.0, we also have seen the rise of what's called the Content Management System, a CMS. In the old way of making a site, you made every page, you coded every page the way you wanted it. Content management systems are adept at creating what's called dynamic construction. So content management systems don't have a page for every piece of content. Instead, they have a template. So all your blog posts look the same. Every time you publish a blog post, instead of having to write all the code, you just click a button that says, I want this to be a blog post, and the system goes and gets the code for what a blog post looks like, puts your stuff on it, and publishes it. So instead of having, here we have Cardinal Com, we have 8 pages. With a WordPress site, if you had a blog, for example, you would have one thing of code for a blog, and every time you published a blog post, it would just pull that code and make that look and feel happen on your website. So the other nice thing about content management systems is it manages your content in such a way that you don't have to change every page if you want to change something. For example, if you put the logo in, it shows up on all the pages. You don't have to open every single page of your blog and put the logo on it. You just say to the system, I want this logo to be everywhere, and it does it for you. So why are we using WordPress specifically? Well, first of all, it's free. It's easy to use. There's lots of online support for it, and actually I'm going to add this in. codex.wordpress.org is basically the textbook and how-to on how to use WordPress. You're going to be reading some readings from it this week. It's also the most popular content management system. It powers 60 million websites and almost 20% of the top 10 million sites. So of the top 10 million sites, 1 in 5 uses WordPress. WordPress is used by CNN, it's used by Vera Bradley, it's used by a lot of large organizations. Let's talk a little bit about the parts of a WordPress site. First, the dashboard. The dashboard is where you go when you log in to your site to control the site and its content. So if you come up with a blog post, if you want it to be on your site, you go to the dashboard and you put it in. The front end is what the visitors to the site see. So let's take a look at the dashboard. If you log into your site, you can control the content and the structure, and it looks something like this. You have all these tools to the left that help you create and share content. To access your dashboard, you always go to name of your site, /WP admin. I'm going to put that in bold. This is the front end. This is what the user sees. So the user never sees your dashboard. That dashboard is just for you to control what goes on the site. The user sees what's called the front end. Now, all WordPress sites have the same parts. We've already talked about the header. The top part, it has the navigation, the logo, possibly search, maybe some advertisements. Usually underneath that is a slider area, which you can turn on and off, so you don't have to have the slider. You can get rid of it if you want. But the slider is the main image area. It usually revolves. It has 1 or 2 different pictures that, or 3 or 4 different pictures that rotate to provide some visual interest. Underneath that, you have a content area here. C is the content area. And in this is where the blog posts go. The arrangement differs depending on what you set up and what theme you use. So in this example, the blog post area is using some very specific types of posts. You have what's called mini features, and you have a portfolio. You could just have all of your recent blogs showing up here. Recent blog posts showing up here. Next to that, you have the sidebar here. This is the area off to the side. It's usually only 1 column. WordPress sites are divided by columns, just like pages, which you may remember from J103. You probably had like a magazine project where you had to decide how many columns you wanted your magazine design to be. Most WordPress sites are 3 or 4 columns. This one is 3. You can see there's 1, 2, 3. And the third column is the sidebar. This is off to the side. Usually it's a 1 column, and here it is. This is where additional materials go, and it usually shows up on every page. So anything that you want people to see over and over and over again on your WordPress site, you generally will put here. So in this example, obviously the search should be on every page. You have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn on here. So this is an area of sort of important tools that you want people to see over and over again. You can also put important messages in here. And then at the bottom we have what's called the footer. This is usually reserved for copyright info. It just gives an anchor to the page and lets people know when they scroll down that they've gotten to the end of the page. Let's talk about some other key terms you'll need to know when dealing with WordPress. The first is widget. A widget is a feature for your users that doesn't come standard with WordPress. So for example, if you want to put a Twitter feed in your sidebar, as this example has, and as you will do for your portfolio project, that doesn't come with WordPress. WordPress doesn't have that. So you have to go out and get a widget, an additional feature that you put on your site to make that happen. A plugin is a free feature you can add to the site. Now, widgets usually are plugins, but not all plugins are widgets. A plugin is just any free feature that you can add to the site, but they aren't necessarily seen by users. That's really the only difference. People going to your site see your widgets. So they see Twitter feeds, they see forums. A plugin such as a spam blocker, they won't even see, they won't even know what's happening. Now, WordPress has sort of a marketplace, very similar to like eBay or Etsy. When you log into your dashboard, you can access the marketplace and you can get plugins from there. So you can add plugins to your site right from the dashboard. Sometimes the plugin will become a widget. Sometimes it's something in the background like a spam blocker. A post, this is very important. A post is content that is added continuously and it stacks up chronologically. So older posts get buried. Posts are used when you want to have a blog, when you want to have content that refreshes continually. Pages, on the other hand, are where you put content that doesn't change very often. Users don't expect pages to update. So a great example here would be if you have a blog, most of what you publish is going to be posts because it's new stuff that you want people to read today or tomorrow. You might have a page like an About Me page. About you, it's really not going to change that often. So you don't need to make a post about it. You want something static, something that's going to stay almost forever. Category is a tag that you can add to a post to sort it. So as your blog exists over time, you start to have more and more posts. You could end up with hundreds or thousands of posts, and people will have trouble finding them on your site. Maybe they remember you had a really great article about something a year ago. How do they find that? Well, you can create categories and tag your posts. So every post can be associated with a category, and this will allow people to narrow down on your site to only categories they care about, and it will help them find your content. And last but not least, theme, a pre-designed template that you can upload to your site. It comes with a specific layout, colors, and sometimes extra features. Now, I always give the metaphor of WordPress being a person. WordPress is you know, the body of you. The theme is like your clothes. So you work the same regardless of what clothes you're wearing. You're the same person and you do the same kinds of things, but you can put on different clothes which will change how you look. It'll change the color you're wearing, it'll change the sort of look and feel that you have, it'll change how other people perceive you. You might have extra features, you might get switch out your little purse for a big bag, and now you can do more stuff because you can put more stuff in your bag. So the theme is a template that is pre-designed, that anyone is allowed to make, that you upload to your site to sort of have your site change its clothes. That's everything that I wanted to talk about. The rest of this week you will be creating a portfolio for yourself using WordPress, and this is your chance to get into WordPress and see how it works. If you have any questions about WordPress or setting up for your portfolio, please feel free to send them my way, and I look forward to seeing your portfolios.